Hi, I'm Melisa Idris, and here with me I have Dr. Joseph Henrich, anthropologist and professor of Human Evolutionary Biology from Harvard University. He's also the author of the book, The Secret of Our Success. Now, his research uses evolutionary theory to understand how human psychology gives rise to culture and how this has essentially shaped our genetic evolution. So he's here at Kazana Megatrends 2019, he gave a special address on evolving the collective brain. Thank you so much, Joe, for being on the show.
It's great to be with you.
Right, so I want to talk about the collective brain because, if I may paraphrase your work, essentially I think it's the collective know-how of how we've learned as a society, all the values and the culture and the motivations that we have learned from one another. So I want to get you to start, if you may, by explaining more about how humans are cultural learners and how this feeds into the collective brain.
Okay, so the key idea is that unlike other species, humans have evolved to be particularly good cultural learners, that from a very young age we begin acquiring ideas, beliefs, values, motivations, our language from other people. And that when you have multiple individuals interacting over time and over many generations, this can give rise to fancy technologies and more sophisticated languages and institutions. And that when you compare different societies, one of the ways you can understand differences in innovation or the complexity of tools is by understanding how interconnected they are. Mm-hmm. And I mean, one simple idea is that if you have more minds, you're more likely to have somebody invent something, and then if that can be learned by others, it diffuses around. The next generation, somebody else invents something and it diffuses around. And that process is really accelerated by having dense social networks where people can learn from each other.
Okay, so interconnectedness, how we learn from one another. You talked about ideas diffusing, right? And the size of the population matters because how many brains there are will help you evolve faster. So these two elements are essentially the reasons why some cultures are more resilient than others, how some societies grow faster than others.
Yeah, but I've also made the case that this is crucial going back deep into human evolutionary history. So one of the ways I start off is with the lost European explorer cases. Okay. And these are cases in which some group of European explorers, or in one case American explorers, get lost and they have to survive as hunter-gatherers. So they're lost in an environment like Australia or the Arctic where hunter-gatherers have existed for centuries and doing just fine. But what you see is that the explorers, despite being frontiersmen or outdoorsmen, can't survive. They can't do the basic things to survive as hunter-gatherers. And this illustrates that we've really evolved to rely, despite our big brains, to rely on this vast body of knowledge and know-how about how to get around, how to make our ways.
All right. So talk to me about the size of populations, because I'm just wondering, is it just that we have, lots of people and that means a society can grow faster because you've got lots of minds? What happens if you have, say, smaller countries or smaller populations with, maybe above average minds as opposed to countries or populations that have bigger but average intelligence, perhaps? Sure.
Well, so a key thing is the size of the collective brain doesn't have to be limited to just the country, for example.
Okay.
So one of the things that Professor Nunn just showed us in a lecture he did is that if you have a lot of immigrants, you create connections back to the home countries of the immigrants, and they come and they innovate, and those around them are more innovative. Oh. So if you look at the U.S., counties that received lots of immigrants had more patents over the course of U.S. history, and they made the native-born Americans even more innovative than they were in counties that received fewer immigrants. And this is consistent with the idea that you're stretching the collective brain beyond your national boundaries, and immigration is one way to do that.
So immigration benefits the collective brain of the host country or the origin country?
It actually does both. Oh. So the connections are built. Immigrants maintain their connections back to the home country, and that opens the door to the flow of information between the two.
All right, so talk to me a little bit about the interconnectedness, as you mentioned a bit earlier, about how knowledge diffuses itself. What builds that interconnectedness?
Well, the key thing is trust and social relationships. And there's a natural inclination for people to build tight social networks among those they know and their families, those who share their language, their religious beliefs, and ethnicity. So the challenge to expanding the brain in the modern world is figuring out ways to build trust with strangers and for people to have flexible relationships where they can go to new places and make new friends, because it's that kind of mobile, flexible network that seems to make the collective brain even larger and stronger.
Okay. Where does diversity play in this? I mean, you talked about building trust, about having this kind of connectedness. Does diversity matter?
Yes, it's really crucial, because imagine if you have two people who know exactly the same stuff. If they come together, there's not much chance for a new idea recombination.
Okay.
So when we look at inventions, most inventions and new ideas are recombinations or versions of different ideas coming together. So you want people with very different areas of knowledge and expertise to create kind of new inventions.
Okay. And how does the collective brain grow throughout the years? Because knowledge has to be passed not just between people, but through generations, right? So how do you have that kind of institutional memory for the collective brain? Yeah,
so you mean humans have been developing and culturally evolving ways to increase the fidelity of transmission across generations. So it's certainly the case that, all human societies create a perpetuation of knowledge, but something like just teaching, so parenting practices can increase the fidelity. Institutions like schools can increase the fidelity of different kinds of knowledge. Songs, story cycles, all of these things provide ways traditionally for societies to increase knowledge.
How is it that there are bits of culture, bits of the collective brain that are forgotten, that are lost, that disappear? There are cultures that no longer exist in today's day and age.
Yeah, so one of the things about the collective brain is if you shrink it, or people become less social, or they become isolated, say ethnic groups spread apart and don't communicate, then you can actually shrink the size of the collective brain and begin to lose knowledge and know-how. And this can result for lots of reasons. My favorite example from my book is the case of Tasmania, where Tasmania was connected to mainland Australia until about 10,000 years ago. And then the climate changed, the seas rose, and Tasmania became an island. And they began losing technologies that they had over the next 10,000 years. Meanwhile, in mainland Australia, the technologies were getting fancier and better adapted to the environment. But it's also happened historically. So at the fall of the Roman Empire, you get the breakdown of Roman roads and Roman security, and then Europeans are actually living amongst structures, for example, that they themselves can't build. And so the Romans could make cement. Europeans couldn't make cement until the British reinvented it centuries later.
That is amazing. So history teaches us that the collective brain can actually shrink.
Yeah,
we can lose this knowledge and perhaps never even regain it back, right? Okay, well, we're going to continue this conversation in just a couple of minutes. Stay tuned.